All right, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but to provide a platform to amplify their voice and share ideas to a more accessible world. Today, I'm joined by Karen Hurley, a physical therapist and owner of AIM Therapy, where she provides fitness opportunities for athletes with all abilities, learning styles, and communication preferences. I've enjoyed watching her business grow from afar, and I'm proud to have her in our AdaptX network. Karen, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Brendan. Great to be here.
So you've worked as a PT in a lot of different settings. One, can you give us an overview of your career progression? And maybe two, what did you learn with each environment and population that you worked with?
So I originally began working at NYU Medical Center, where I got a very broad understanding of physical therapy, working in outpatient, inpatient, the ICUs. We even had an office at the New York Times. I did pediatrics, so really got a very broad overview of all the skills. Came back to Massachusetts and started in a sports orthopedic clinic. And then as I started a family, my business kind of evolved and I started my own business. And as the kids got older, it evolves again. I did do early intervention. I loved it. And then I progressed from there. I ended up working in the school system, which I loved as my kids got older. Then I could kind of have the same schedule as them. The part that I loved about working in the schools is really helping all students be more active, whether they were on IEPs or not. And so that really taught me a lot about working with individuals of all abilities. And that really, the schools really helped progress my career to where I'm at today. I think the thing that I've learned along the way is I'm not afraid of any disability, because I've worked in the ICUs, I've worked with people on oxygen, nonverbal, verbal, in every environment. So I really have a great understanding that I feel comfortable working with anyone.
How do you think people could get over the fear of maybe those different types of disabilities or abilities? And maybe like you are clearly comfortable putting yourself in a lot of different environments, but not everyone might be. But that skill set has been essential to your career now, working with a diverse population. So I guess what advice could you give to someone who might want to stay in a specific lane and not really branch out to other populations?
Get out of it. I think when I first started, I knew ultimately I wanted to probably do more sports orthopedics or work more with kids, but I knew it was important to work in a setting where I rotated through different disciplines and really had great exposure. In that first setting, there were 80 to 90 physical therapists, so we had weekly meetings, there was support, there was guidance. So really working in an environment where you have colleagues you can ask questions with and learn from others, and you can do it with assistance, is really probably the best way to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably a stark contrast to your work now, right? Because now as an entrepreneur, you don't really have that network and those co-workers. I mean, you have some, but obviously on a much smaller scale than 80 to 90 physical therapists. So what do you like about kind of being on your own, and what did you like about the team environment?
That's a great question. I still love the team environment and I still collaborate with everyone, and we can talk about it in the podcast. I am making a manual of how to work with athletes with all abilities, similar to yours, but a little different spin. And with that, I still love collaborating because I know my lane and I don't know others' lanes. So it's really important to always be connecting and collaborating with others. The part I love about having my own business and being the entrepreneur is the creativity. And of designing what I really wanted to do.
Yeah, and you've been in clinics, you've been in community-based fitness facilities, and you've worked with populations who many might deem are almost like reserved for physical therapy. So I think there's still that misconception that people with disabilities have to go to PT, like they shouldn't be in gyms, or that's not like their main location. What is I guess what's the scope of practice, I guess, between a physical therapist and maybe we can just call them adaptive fitness professionals, a personal trainer that wants to work with adaptive populations? Like, where do you think the line is between what you can do versus what someone else can do?
It's a blurry line, Brendan.
Yeah.
As you know from your business too, physical therapy is more acute injury, acute situation where you're really trying to make specific gains in a specific area, whether that be shoulder mobility, shoulder strength, or balance so that you could walk outside on uneven surfaces. Whereas the adaptive fitness is more of a holistic approach, looking at improving, yes, your strength, but also your balance, your coordination, your overall health, fitness, weight loss, if need be. So I think the fitness is more global and not as specific and targeted. That being said, there is a big overlap because many athletes with disabilities have very specific needs. But like you said, that doesn't mean they need to be seen in a physical therapy clinic. They just have to have a trainer who's aware of their challenges and incorporate them into their training session.
Yeah, and I think best practices from a personal trainer standpoint is always kind of like you referenced before, collaboration with their medical staff, whether they have a physician or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, and seeing how you can integrate those pieces within a generic fitness session. So, you mentioned a manual that you were developing. I've always I've had trouble might not be the word, but I go back and forth on resources for athletes with autism and neurodiversity, with it being such a broad spectrum of ability and communication preferences. It feels challenging to make gross generalizations across the diagnosis. How do you, how do you categorize athletes with autism, and how do you determine how you can most effectively help them?
So those are great questions. So I did begin with taking your course probably 5 years ago. And one of the interesting things that you talked about was universal design of fitness. And you can try and apply the techniques to the most amount of people. However, like you're saying, if you meet one athlete with autism, you meet one athlete with autism because their profiles are so vast that it is hard. And I am creating more of a manual that helps coaches look at it from what is based in school of an individualized educational plan and kind of creating an individualized fitness plan. Within that model, you use universal design of learning or universal design of fitness, and you also incorporate the least restrictive environment. The thing that makes it unique is I have gone to many inclusion symposiums and I raise my hand and say, I'm a hypocrite because I have an athlete I see one on one in a quiet space with the door closed, and I'm saying I'm doing inclusive. But for that athlete, that is their most inclusive environment that they can be successful in. So I create environments that are most successful for each athlete. And that is where the manual comes in, is really helping coaches assess based on athletes' disability, their communication style, their learning style, their ability to be their ability to be successful, and then creating a program. Within that, nothing is perfect. I do try and create small groups so that it is successful and there is the opportunity for connection and community, because that's such an important part of wellness. But that is what makes it different. And that's what also makes it a challenge, is offering classes that have one athlete or four athletes and two coaches for these athletes to be successful. So that's kind of helping coaches to really look at it from a behavior perspective,
Yeah.
from a communication perspective, as well as the fitness perspective.
Yeah, that's something, that topic of like what is inclusive to each person is something that I've been particularly interested in. I mean, I've considered my gym an inclusive strength and conditioning facility for the last 9 years, but ultimately I don't get to decide whether it's inclusive. The people who come in do, and that environment's going to look different for each person, and we might not be providing exactly what they need. So we have to be receptive to feedback and kind of catering the environment to what they want. So like we don't do really one-to-one sessions. So that client that you were referring to, like we wouldn't be able to empty out the gym and give him the gym to himself. So in that case, my gym wouldn't be inclusive to them. So I think it's just a dynamic, kind of ever evolving commitment. So people might be afraid to put themselves out there, start working with people with disabilities with the fear of inevitably not being inclusive for someone. But I guess all we can really do is support the person in front of us, and if we're not the best environment for them, help them find the place that is. So it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. But
Yeah. And I think that's great. And I offer families the whole continuum. I do teach neurotypical kids classes. So there are a few athletes with ADHD that can do that. And then I have some athletes with ADHD that cannot handle 12 other athletes in a class and need a smaller group. So I think it's great to offer the continuum as well as say what you can and can't do.
yeah,
I agree
yeah.
with that.
Yeah, I guess the transparency of, to like you said, what you can and cannot support is probably essential. Not making false promises of being able to support a client if you're not able to offer them that least restrictive environment that they need. It's interesting to, because I also started in special education, kind of in like schools, and adopted some of those ideas of reinforcement strategies and IEP goals and stuff like that into our fitness programming. It's interesting to see how that can be embedded. And I often think about how SLP, like speech and language pathology, can be incorporated within fitness as well and supporting those goals. How have you had experience, I guess, working with clients, support teams from schools, and seeing how you can embed it within your fitness programming?
100%, because that makes it be more successful for everyone. I have one athlete who's a Gestalt learner, a communicator, and he communicates through Mickey Mouse phrases. And by working with the parent as well as with the speech therapist, there's certain songs within the Mickey Mouse um, song track that are counting songs. And then there's the hot dog song, which is always played at the end of a session. So sometimes during the session, he wants to be done, he plays the hot dog song. And I instead use a different cue of the counting of this is what we're going to do. And then at the end of the session, I always play the hot dog song so that I acknowledge, but I'm communicating through his way. So by using that is fabulous. I do connect a lot with speech therapists. I have another athlete that uses spell to communicate. So by connecting with the speech therapist, I learned about how you can spell words, and that's how he communicates. There's others that work with sometimes a BCBA will come to kind of help with the behaviors. There's been times where Other assistants come, education, and a lot is through parent communication because a lot of parents know what works best for their child, or they can communicate the connection between what they're doing with the occupational therapist to help the athlete regulate, or what terminology. I find that's really important, that a lot of athletes with neurodiversity have specific words that help them to be successful. And by using the consistency of particular verbiage, whether it be learned from parents or other healthcare providers, I do a lot of that. I have a very deliberate and slow onboarding process, which, as you know, as a business, it's a catch-22. However, for the success of my athletes, it has been phenomenally successful. Of really a first phone call, talk to parents, learn about your athlete, what are their triggers, behaviors, communication, what does school look like for them, what in fitness has not worked for them and what has worked, and then doing a complimentary session in the gym where you observe the athlete and see what their preferences are. And then sometimes from there, I make a mental note, okay, I need to connect with this care provider. And it evolves like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that onboarding process is probably a good segue into one of the things I was going to ask you, which is how managed behavior makes it sound so negative, but how can you support a client who might exhibit some unproductive behaviors in the gym or have some sort of task avoidance, or maybe just have difficulty with intrinsic motivation and understanding that like you and I might exercise because we know that fitness is good for us long term and we can kind of see that longitudinal necessity of it, but not everyone can. So how do you motivate clients? How do you figure out, you mentioned triggers and some antecedents when you were talking about the onboarding process. I would imagine that's essential, but what do you think is most effective to, I guess for lack of term, manage behaviors and make sure clients are successful in that regard?
So it is definitely twofold. So I'll start with motivation, and that's definitely learning from the parents what motivates, or in the first meeting, a lot of athletes with neurodiversity, they want tickles or deep pressure. So sometimes it's, okay, Brendan, you're going to do sit-ups. What do you want? Tickle or squish? And so literally every sit-up, I'll tickle you under the chin or I'll squish your hands. And so it's embedding that motivation that is their motivation that is very different than the motivation you're talking about. I also do a lot of pairing and of songs, and it may not be the music we think is important. I have one athlete and his favorite song is Chicka Chicka Boom, A met B and B met C. And so he literally walks into the gym and he looks up at the speakers. And once I play Chicka Chicka Boom, he smiles. This past week, he actually did a 360 dance move, which I've never seen him do. And then he'll start working. And I play the song for the 30 minutes, and it's successful. That motivates him. We also, at the end of the session, his goal is he loves the garage doors, and we're in a big garage bay. And so first work, then garage door, first work, then garage door. And that's what motivates him, not that he's going to get stronger picking things up off the ground, not that he's getting stronger doing balance activities. So that's how I do a lot of motivation, is really using different, pairing it with different activities.
Yeah.
And music is one, and then also the pressure, squish, tickles, or a break. First this, then a break, which sometimes you and I may not need a break, but athletes with neurodiversity may need a break sooner than they physically need it because of other demands that are put on them and stress them out. From a behavior perspective, if an athlete has behaviors, I will only see them one-on-one and at a time when it's quiet. to really try and not trigger the behaviors. With that, I do believe behavior is communication. So one athlete, he kind of kept flicking me, and I said, "Well, what do you need?" He said, "Oh, help." "Oh, okay. Well, rather than, tapping me, why don't you ask for help?" Or another same athlete, he's been working really hard so that he can ski and bend his knees. And we finally, after 3 months, been able to do a wall squat. And he was so excited, screaming and yelling. And anyone else in the gym probably would have been thinking, there is a significant problem. He was ecstatic. So understanding why his behavior was occurring helps. And then when there are physical behaviors, I always keep a parent nearby. I'm not in a school setting. I do the best I can, but really communicating with parents. How do you deal with this? How do we work with this? And also trying to intervene as you see their stress level rise. Give the athlete a break. Give them a squish. Give them a tickle. Play the song. Let them have water. And that's how I do it. Also with progression of exercise, when athletes have behaviors, doing it very slowly and slower than you would with a typical athlete can help build success. I had one athlete that would come and I would see him individually with the garage door closed, with his mother and I, because he had some behaviors. And now he's in 2 inclusive CrossFit classes, and he's in a Special Olympics powerlifting team, and he needs minimal support. So sometimes it varies, and it just takes time.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of things in there that were great points. Being astutely aware of body language has always been pretty essential. And then that last comment about that progression, I think that's important. That it's no different than if you were to get a new client who hasn't worked out in a long time. You wouldn't just want to throw them into a fast-paced CrossFit class. They're not going to be successful whether they have a disability or not, because their fitness level doesn't match the demands of the workout. So in that case, maybe you start with a one-to-one or a small group, more individualized, and then over time, if they want to progress into a group class, they can. Not everyone will want to, but I think it's important to have that infrastructure for once that client that has autism that you started with builds up the prerequisite skills to being able to squat and hinge and carry and doing all those exercises. If they want a social piece, to have that that progression in place, I think is important. And then you guys leverage volunteers, correct? Do you have high school volunteers that do the workouts with the clients?
We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below.
Yes. So similar to unified sports, like the Special Olympics model, I use that model and leverage a lot of peer volunteers, which is great. 1, for encouragement, 2, for connection, 3, to build a community. And that I have found has been invaluable. It also has taught the volunteers about working with individuals with disabilities, that just because they have a disability doesn't mean you can't connect with them. You can't communicate. You can't be part of a team. So the learning has been twofold, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Unified sports is how I got my first introduction to disability when I was 15. And I always try to communicate to our volunteers that you don't know kind of what you're going to get out of this unless you really approach it with an open mind. And I think it can really change perspectives and perceptions that kids have about disability. They've often seen it portrayed in maybe a predominantly negative manner. And when you're kind of sharing an interest, like working out with someone with a disability, and you see the similarities more than the differences. I think it can be really impactful. How do you educate those volunteers as to what you expect from them and what they should be aware of?
Great question. So I've been working to fine tune that more and more, and I will be improving the process and creating a training video that they can watch at home, just of previewing what you're going to be seeing. And then the first couple of times you come, I always pair you up with a volunteer that has more experience so they can educate you. We've also been implementing a system where each athlete with a disability has a card, and on that card it has their communication style, if they're triggers, how much weight they're doing, or for example, how they celebrate. We have some athletes that want very quiet. I have one athlete that wants one high five. We have another athlete that when you high five him, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, And so by giving the volunteers that knowledge of how to connect with them helps to make them successful sooner and connect. So that's been a new project that we are implementing to help train them.
Yeah, we follow a similar pattern where like I don't necessarily have a formal onboarding process, although we do have like an inclusion 101, which just kind of talks about like etiquette and language and stuff. But I think really the best, similar to how you explained yours, we'll typically have a new volunteer shadow or observe a little bit. Those first couple sessions just get to know the athletes in the gym and get to know them on a personal level just as much as on a fitness level, and because that's going to be essential. I mean, I think we manage behaviors, if you want to call it that, by just knowing the athlete's interests and preferences and building rapport. That's I think, an essential piece of that relationship. So, how has your understanding of inclusion evolved over the years? You've been in similar settings as I have been, like school-based unified sports, stuff like that, and I feel like my understanding of inclusion has changed. Be curious if you see how it's kind of evolved over the years.
How has your understanding evolved?
Yeah, well, I started my gym with that unified sports model, and I guess what we've tried to work towards is not differentiating by population. So instead of unified sessions, typical sessions, we've tried to build up the infrastructure and the support for someone who's blind or someone with autism to choose when they want to work out, whether they want to work out with other quote unquote neurotypical adults or whether they want to work out with some of their peers from school that are in the life skills program or the special education program. But like giving them that autonomy of choice. I think I thought that inclusion depended on the presence of people with and without disabilities in the room, but now I'm not sure it does. I think it depends on that individual feeling like a sense of belonging and community, and the presence of a diagnosis doesn't determine that. So, I think there's still some ambiguity in what's inclusion. I don't think you can say what's not inclusive, because you can't make that decision for the individual. But yeah, I think it's just kind of reflected in our business model, maybe. But
I agree. I think for me, similarly, inclusion varies based on the person and what they want and what they believe is inclusive. And that was a hard concept to grasp. However, within the inclusion, I view inclusion as connection. And whether it is I connect with that athlete on Chicka Chicka Boom, or they connect with a whole group, or connect through Mickey Mouse or visuals, I think inclusion is really about connecting, and that looks different.
Yeah, I think it was something that we talked about a couple of years ago when you were first starting. Like, how do I market inclusion, like in fitness?
Yeah.
Like, how do I demonstrate that I want people with disabilities to come into my facility? Because historically, they might not assume that gym, you work in a CrossFit gym, like they might not assume that place is for them, and you want to showcase that it is, but you also don't want to kind of, I don't know, throw people with disabilities and all your material and start kind of parading them around. So it's like that fine line, I guess, between marketing inclusion ethically and yeah. So it's been a tricky thing for us too. Like we don't do a ton of marketing. It's mostly word of mouth. But I want to celebrate their accomplishments, but not oversell it, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think sometimes I'm not selling what they do. However, I sometimes want to show people what they can do
Right. Exactly.
because there's so much presumed incompetency because they have a disability, as opposed to presumed competency looks different.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I agree with you, but I do agree that word of mouth is the biggest and best way because this group is a small group, and the guardians or parents, they communicate, and that's been what's most successful for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What are your biggest goals for the next year or two with your business?
So I am creating a manual to train other coaches how to do what I do. I'm started out as the only one that was doing all the classes and all the individuals. So I am onboarding other coaches and learning to step back and take more of a training management role. And I am looking to progress to a nonprofit status. So that is a journey in itself. And getting more systems in place. I started the business with one inclusive CrossFit class and no one showed up,
Mm-hmm.
to 9 classes, a powerlifting team, 3 kids classes, and it really took off. I'm a great physical therapist, a great coach, but I never had training on how to run a business, and hence have
Yeah.
my emails or text messages
Mm-hmm.
to you. How
Mm-hmm.
do you market? How do you do this? Or to other people in the industry. So really trying to get systems in place to make it more reproducible
Yeah. Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
exist without me there.
Yeah, I think fitness, a lot of people get into it because they themselves love exercising or they've had some formative experience related to fitness or physical activity. And then you get kind of thrown into the industry without any guidance as to how you can develop or how you can kind of build a career out of it. And it's one of the few industries I think that doesn't really have much mentorship or support. Everyone's kind of on their own. So it's definitely a learning process from a business standpoint, at least, of how you can be the best coach in the world, but if people don't learn about you or you aren't running a repeatable business and a consistent business, then it's not going to be effective. So that's definitely challenging. What spearheaded your transition to nonprofit status, if you're able to share?
Price structure. In order for a lot of my athletes to be successful, they need a small group. And with that, we have 4 to 6 athletes with 2 coaches. And many typical coaches just have a coaching certification. All my coaches have a master's in special ed or occupational therapy or physical therapy. And really, you need that expertise of skill set. And I think they need to be compensated for what they're doing. However, to ask families to be paying for a significantly higher price when they have so many other expenses is inequity between athletes with and without neurodiversity. And then within that, as I've expanded to the 22 plus athlete group, there are very few opportunities, and a lot of the athletes that I work with in that group are limited by Social Security, and they can only have so much and they can only pay so much. So it is only further perpetuating these athletes' inability to access a gym that leads to further chronic illness and mental challenges that needs to, I feel that going nonprofit and getting some fundraising and some grants will help to stop that cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Socioeconomic considerations are huge as well. You can't really claim to be inclusive and accessible if you have to charge significantly more than you would for someone without a disability to train as well. So that's another piece where all of our members, whether they have a disability or not, pay the same price point, and some of our adaptive athletes require more coaching, and maybe they need a one-to-one even though they're only paying $14 or $15 a session, and that's not a profitable, I guess, client for us, but it is part of our mission to create accessible fitness opportunities. So, but our model is a little different in that we are a traditional gym that has several hundred members with and without disabilities. So the two can kind of offset one another. But yeah, I think the nonprofit, the access to grants and fundraising opportunities is great, and you can definitely craft a story as to what you're doing, who you're supporting, and find funding sources through that story that you can tell. So if there's anything I can do to help, let me know with that. But what do you think the fitness industry at large could do better to support people with disabilities?
Please recommend the typical model that just because you have a disability, oh, come to class and I will decrease the number of repetitions you do. Come to class and we'll decrease the weight. It's more than that. And I think that's the model that I've used, but I don't have a setup like yours where I have more typical athletes. So I think that providing options and looking at it differently, from a different lens, from a different perspective. And what is success? For many of my athletes who are younger, they struggle with play dates, they struggle with peer relationships. And when over time, seeing the social emotional learning that occurs in the class, because it's scaffolded into the program, and seeing these kids come in and fist bump or good job or working together, that's success. It's not necessarily that they're carrying more weight or they're squatting more. So I think success looks different, and you have to really find out what are the parent guardian athletes' goals? What does success look like to them?
Yeah. And I wonder if sometimes the parent guardian or the athlete themselves isn't quite sure what they're capable of, because they might not have had access to a program like yours in the past, and the opportunities that you provide and the training that you provide shows them that their son or daughter is capable of more than they might have expected.
I definitely agree with that. I just did sit-ups with one athlete, and I said to the dad afterwards, he said, "Oh yeah, we did sit-ups." You did sit-ups?
Right, yeah.
I was like, yeah. Does he like to get on the ground? No. So do I have him sit on a 12-inch block? Yeah. But he's doing it. So I think
that creative problem solving too, I think, is an essential piece of a good coach. Like, I mean, you're never gonna be taught that, like, oh, the person doesn't want to sit on the ground, like, let me put them on this elevated surface. Those are things that I think you really just pick up through experience. It's not like it's going to exist in a continuing ed course, or it's just trial and error, and being open-minded and creative in how you modify and set up exercises has been pretty essential for us. There's definitely more similarities than differences in terms of exercises that we choose, but sometimes the setup just looks a little more unique.
Yeah, and sometimes if an athlete's self-directed and they don't want to do band pull down standing and they're lying down, great. I'm going to have you lie down and I'm going to keep working with where you're at. So it is definitely that creativity and the messiness when I'm training new coaches, I really tell them embrace the messiness.
Right.
And I'm okay if you have one plan, 3 plans, 10 plans, because sometimes I have athletes that come in and they're very dysregulated. So what I thought was going to be great is not going to work. And all of a sudden we get the med balls out and we just slam them for 10 minutes. Then everyone's more regulated. Okay, so
Yeah.
changing your plan
Yeah.
is okay.
It's like being open-minded, but also presuming competence. Like just because that individual might have come in dysregulated once and wasn't successful at the beginning of the session doesn't mean that that should be your new expectation. You just have to kind of be able to adapt and be more flexible in the structure. I think that messiness is sometimes hard for people to accept. We write out all these curated plans and rep schemes and intensity ranges, and we think that it has to exist that way, but it really doesn't. And I think the most important metric to measure is consistency, and consistency is a byproduct of enjoyment and a lot of different things, not just how the program is designed.
I agree. I had one athlete last June showed up to class, and the parent, which was great information before class, said he is very dysregulated. Well, he was in the Boston schools, and they let out school a day and a half early because of the heat wave, and because one of the Boston sports teams was having the parade in downtown Boston. I'm blanking on which team was it, Celtics or Bruins?
Right.
And he was, how can you tell a student with moderate autism, oh, today's the last day of school and you're done a day and a half early? It rocked his world. So exactly what you're saying, that was one day, but communicating with the parents and hearing, what's the backstory? Oh, okay. So that's not always to be expected, that you're
Right.
let out of school early or things like that. But
Yeah.
really being flexible and
Yeah, and it's not exclusive to disabilities too. People come in with different stresses and demands, and we often have to, I don't know, modify workouts and adjust workouts accordingly. And sometimes people won't sleep well, and they'll come in, and we won't go for a specific weight that we were intending on going for. And I speak just with general populations for that. Like, there's always some degree of flexibility that and open-mindedness that's required. But if people want to connect with you or learn more about your businesses, what are the best places for them to do so?
so you could go to my website, Adaptive Aim Therapy, or you can follow me on Instagram, which is aim_therapy. And you could find my email and reach out to me that way. Love to hear from anyone with questions or interest. That would be great.
Yeah, we'll include all that stuff in the show notes. And if someone's interested in observing one of your programs or coming by to shadow, is that an opportunity that's available?
Yes, considering I've been to your gym to do exactly that. That is how we learn. And I always appreciated when I would come, all the questions you would let me ask and answer. So I think that only makes
those conversations I view as my opportunity to learn just as much as my opportunity to teach someone else. So I'm never going to pretend that my model is perfect. I think that open-mindedness is essential to kind of staying up to date as things evolve and as new people come in. So it's if there's anything I can do to disseminate this resource that you're creating, let me know. If there's any way I can contribute to it, let me know. But Karen, thanks for joining me, and we'll include those contacts in the show notes so people can easily find them and hopefully follow along with your journey.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Cool. Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.